On a cold Monday morning in Washington, D.C., two unlikely allies met to change the American media landscape forever. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt and Elon Musk, the world's richest man, come from different worlds, but they share a common enemy, a media empire that manipulates the truth. No one could have predicted that the documents in their hands would bring down dozens of media outlets before diving into the story. Comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The morning air was sharp and crisp as Karoline Leavitt's government vehicle pulled into the private entrance of the Jefferson Hotel at 27. The youngest White House press secretary in American history had already established a reputation for uncompromising directness that made her both respected and feared in Washington's political ecosystem. Today, however, she wasn't acting in her official capacity. The meeting scheduled for 7:30 a.m. in the hotel's secure Edison suite didn't appear on any government calendar. Her small security detail had been instructed to wait in the lobby, another unusual deviation from protocol. "Are you sure about this, ma'am?" her lead agent asked. Clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement, Leavitt nodded, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. "I won't be long. This is personal business." Personal business with Elon Musk, the enigmatic billionaire whose acquisition of social media giant X, formerly Twitter, had sent shockwaves through the tech and media landscapes. The man who had recently declared traditional media is living on borrowed time in a midnight post that garnered millions of views. That's Leavitt rode the elevator to the penthouse level. She mentally rehearsed her approach. The contents of the portfolio represented an enormous risk, documents collected over months of careful work, revealing patterns that, if proven true, would shake the foundations of American journalism. She needed Musk's help, but she also knew his unpredictable nature could make him as much a liability as an asset. The elevator doors opened to reveal a suited security professional who verified her identity before leading her down a hallway to a set of double doors. Inside, the Edison suite had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Screens displayed real-time data flows, news feeds, and what appeared to be internal communication logs from multiple media organizations. Elon Musk stood before the largest display, dressed casually in a black t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the formal Washington atmosphere. He turned as she entered, his expression brightening with genuine interest. "Miss Leavitt," he greeted her, extending his hand. "Thank you for reaching out. Your message was intriguing." "Mr. Musk," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I appreciate your discretion." Musk gestured to a seating area away from his team of analysts and technicians. "You mentioned you have information about systematic media manipulation that aligns with my own findings. I've been investigating this space since acquiring X, but I suspect your perspective from inside the administration offers unique insights." Leavitt took a seat, carefully placing her portfolio on the table between them. "Before I share what I've gathered, I need to be clear. I'm not here in my capacity as press secretary. President Trump has no knowledge of this meeting or my investigation." Musk raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant risk to your position." "Some things matter more than job security," Leavitt replied. "For the past 9 months, I've been documenting a pattern that goes far beyond the usual media bias. What I've found is an organized, systematic effort to distort reality, not just opinion pieces or editorial slant, but fabrication of sources, coordination between supposedly competing outlets, and deliberate suppression of stories that don't fit predetermined narratives." She opened her portfolio and removed a stack of documents. "These are internal communications from editors at 5 major news organizations. They show identical talking points being distributed simultaneously, often with direct language to be used and topics to be avoided." Musk studied the papers, his expression darkening. "How did you obtain these?" "I have sources inside these organizations, journalists who are increasingly uncomfortable with what they're being asked to do. They've been collecting evidence for years but didn't know what to do with it." "Why come to me?" Musk asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew the answer. "Because you've been vocal about media corruption and you have both the resources and the platform to help expose it. More importantly, you're unbuyable. These organizations can't threaten or bribe you into silence." Musk nodded, continuing to scan the documents. "This aligns with what we've been seeing at X. Our analysis shows coordinated narrative deployment across supposedly independent outlets. Same phrases, same timing, same omissions." He gestured to one of the screens where a complex web of connections was displayed. "We've been mapping the relationships between media executives, their corporate parents, and political donors. The patterns are ... concerning." Leavitt leaned forward. "I have more than just internal communications. I have financial records showing payments to consultants who appear to be fictitious entities. I have evidence of stories being killed after calls from specific government officials, both Republican and Democrat, by the way. This isn't partisan, it's systemic." Musk's eyes lit up with the intensity that had characterized his most ambitious ventures. "Show me everything." For the next 2 hours, Leavitt and Musk compared notes, merged datasets, and connected dots that neither had been able to link independently. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of media manipulation on a scale that exceeded even their suspicions. It's not just individual stories, Musk observed as they studied the combined evidence. It's an ecosystem designed to create and maintain specific narratives regardless of underlying facts. Look at how they handled the Beijing trade negotiations. Last year, identical framing across 23 outlets, same experts quoted, same information excluded, all serving a specific economic agenda. Leavitt nodded. And it crosses political lines. Conservative and liberal outlets appear to be fierce opponents, but they're often owned by the same parent companies, use the same revenue models, and ultimately serve the same purpose, generating engagement through division while protecting certain interests from scrutiny. As their meeting approached the 3-hour mark, Musk's security lead entered with an urgent message. "Sir, we're detecting unusual network activity targeting our systems. Someone may be aware of this meeting." Musk seemed unsurprised. "They have sources everywhere, which means we need to move faster than they can respond." He turned to Leavitt. "What's your proposal? What do we do with all this?" Leavitt had come prepared with a strategy. A coordinated release of evidence across multiple platforms simultaneously. Too much information for them to contain, with clear documentation that even casual readers can understand. No single target for them to discredit or silence. When Musk asked tomorrow, Leavitt replied without hesitation, "If we wait, they'll find a way to undermine us." The element of surprise is crucial. Musk's face broke into a grin that had launched 1,000 memes. "I like your style, Ms. Leavitt, direct and decisive." He turned to his team. "Prepare for Operation Media Veritas. Full deployment, all platforms, 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow." One of his analysts looked concerned. "Sir, we haven't completed verification on all the documentation, then focus on what we can fully verify in the next 18 hours, Musk replied. Ms. Leavitt's White House credentials provide additional validation, but will maintain journalistic standards. Nothing goes out without multiple source confirmation. As the team mobilized, Leavitt felt a momentary pang of doubt. Once this starts, there's no going back. My career in politics will likely be over. The White House can't be associated with this kind of action. Musk studied her thoughtfully. You knew that when you contacted me. What made it worth the risk? Leavitt's expression hardened with resolve. I joined the administration to serve the American people. How can they make informed decisions as citizens if the information they receive is systematically manipulated? This isn't about politics anymore. It's about whether we still live in a functioning democracy. Musk nodded slowly. Then let's give them the truth and let them decide what to do with it. As Leavitt prepared to leave, Musk handed her a secure communication device. Use this for the next 24 hours. Your regular channels are almost certainly compromised. Back in her government vehicle, Leavitt maintained her usual composed demeanor, but her mind raced with both apprehension and determination. By this time, tomorrow, the carefully constructed narratives that had shaped American public opinion for decades would begin to unravel. The institutions that had positioned themselves as arbiters of truth would face unprecedented scrutiny. She had just initiated the most significant media disruption in modern history, partnering with one of the few people powerful enough to withstand the inevitable backlash. Whether this would be remembered as a heroic defense of transparency or a reckless act of institutional destruction remained to be seen. What was certain was that nothing in American media would ever be the same again. Throughout that day, unusual activity rippled across newsrooms nationwide. Editors received cryptic warnings from corporate headquarters about potential security concerns. IT departments reported increased monitoring of internal communications. Senior producers at major networks were called into emergency meetings with legal counsel present. Something had spooked the media establishment, though few understood what was coming. At CNN's Washington bureau, veteran anchor Michael Reynolds, who was preparing for his evening broadcast when his executive producer pulled him aside. We're getting strange directives from New York, she whispered. They want us to prepare a package on misinformation campaigns and the dangers of unsourced allegations. No specific context provided. Reynolds frowned. That's oddly generic. What prompted it? No idea. But it came from the very top, marked highest priority. Similar conversations were occurring across every major network and publication. Journalists accustomed to receiving narrative guidance found these vague defensive preparations unsettling. Something was clearly happening, but the usual coordinated messaging was absent, replaced by what felt like panicked improvisation. At the White House, Leavitt conducted her afternoon press briefing with characteristic efficiency, giving no indication of her morning meeting or the digital bombshell set to detonate the following day. Only the most observant might have noticed she wasn't carrying her usual government-issued phone. As evening fell, Elon Musk posted a single cryptic message on X. The truth fears no questions. 9 a.m. ET tomorrow. The post received hundreds of thousands of engagements within minutes, sparking wild speculation about a new product announcement or company acquisition. No one guessed he was about to release over 17,000 pages of internal media documents, communication logs, financial records, and recorded conversations that would expose decades of coordinated manipulation by the institutions Americans had trusted to inform them. In the quiet of her apartment that night, Karoline Leavitt prepared for the storm that would engulf Washington by morning. She drafted her resignation letter, backed up personal files, and sent brief encoded messages to the small circle of journalists who had supplied her with documentation over the past months. "Eagle flies at dawn," she texted to her primary source, an investigative reporter at the Washington Post who had become disillusioned after seeing his most significant stories repeatedly killed by management. "Be ready." As midnight approached, her secure device buzzed with a message from Musk. "Final verification complete. All systems go." History doesn't remember the comfortable, it remembers the courageous. Leavitt allowed herself a small smile at his characteristic grandiosity, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. By this time tomorrow, she would either be vindicated as a champion of transparency or vilified as a destroyer of institutions. Perhaps both. Either way, the American media landscape was about to experience its most significant disruption since the advent of television. The collusion, corruption, and manipulation that had shaped public discourse for generations would finally face the disinfectant of sunlight. And with that thought, she closed her eyes to get what little sleep she could before the dawn of a new era in American journalism. At precisely 9 a.m. Eastern Time, the coordinated release began with a precision that reflected both Musk's technical expertise and Leavitt's strategic planning. Across multiple platforms simultaneously, Operation Media Veritas deployed its first wave of evidence on X. Musk published a comprehensive thread detailing the investigation's methodology and key findings, accompanied by links to a newly launched website where thousands of documents were organized into searchable categories. The site's distributed hosting structure made it virtually impossible to take down through conventional means. Simultaneously, a consortium of independent journalists and content creators who had been secretly briefed overnight began publishing their analyses of specific documents, breaking down complex media manipulation tactics into digestible explanations for general audiences. The release was structured to prevent any single point of failure. If one platform censored the information, a dozen others would still carry it. If traditional media ignored the story, alternative channels would amplify it until it couldn't be contained. At the White House, Leavitt arrived early, her resignation letter to the Chief of Staff, and cleared out her office before most staffers had even arrived. By the time her absence was noted, she was already seated before cameras in a private studio Musk had arranged, preparing to address the American people directly. "Good morning," she began, her composed demeanor belying the enormity of the moment. "My name is Karoline Leavitt. Until 1 hour ago, I served as White House press secretary. Today, I'm speaking to you not as a government official or political figure, but as an American citizen concerned about the integrity of our information ecosystem." She proceeded to outline how her position had given her a unique vantage point, to observe systematic distortion in media coverage, how identical talking points would appear across supposedly competing outlets, how factual stories would be buried while manufactured narratives flourished. "What we are releasing today is not a partisan attack or personal vendetta," she emphasized. "The documentation spans administrations of both parties and media organizations across the political spectrum. This is about a system that has failed the American people, a system where corporate interests, government influence, and engagement algorithms have replaced journalistic integrity and the pursuit of truth." As Leavitt continued her methodical presentation, the initial public reaction was forming. Social media exploded with discussions of specific revelations, internal emails showing editors killing stories that threatened advertising relationships, messaging coordination between supposedly competing networks, and perhaps most damning, evidence of selective editing that fundamentally changed the meaning of events and statements. The major networks, initially attempting to ignore the story, found themselves forced to address it as viewership for their morning programs plummeted in real time. With audiences migrating to live streams covering the revelations, their first strategy, dismissing the document dump as unverified allegations, collapsed when viewers began finding specific examples of manipulation they themselves remembered. Now explained with behind-the-scenes documentation. At CNN headquarters, an emergency executive meeting had devolved into chaos. "Half these documents came from our own servers," shouted the network's legal counsel. "We need to address this directly before someone else controls the narrative." "And say what exactly?" countered the president of news. "That yes, we coordinate coverage with other networks, that we've been shaping rather than reporting news for decades. There's no spin that makes this acceptable to viewers." Similar scenes played out across newsrooms nationwide as media organizations found themselves in the unfamiliar and uncomfortable position of becoming the story, with no ability to control how it was told by noon. The second wave of revelations hit. These focused specifically on financial relationships between media conglomerates and the subjects they covered or strategically didn't cover. investment ties between network executives and pharmaceutical companies whose negative studies went unreported, real estate developments owned by media parent companies that received favorable regulatory treatment after critical reporting was suppressed. The documents revealed not just bias but systemic corruption that transcended political ideologies. Conservative and liberal outlets alike were implicated in accepting payments to shape coverage, bury stories, or promote specific narratives that served corporate interests regardless of factual merit. Wall Street responded immediately. Share prices of major media companies plunged as investors recognized the existential threat these revelations posed to traditional business models. Advertising contracts included morality clauses that could now potentially be triggered, threatening the primary revenue stream for networks already struggling with declining viewership. In Silicon Valley, technology executives watched with a mixture of apprehension and vindication. For years, their companies had been blamed for the deterioration of public discourse while traditional media positioned itself as the responsible alternative. Now the curtain had been pulled back, revealing that the supposed guardians of truth had been active participants in its distortion. By mid-afternoon, the story had become impossible to contain or control. International news organizations not implicated in the scandal began running their own verification of the documents, confirming their authenticity and expanding the analysis. The BBC aired a special report titled The American Media Collapse, featuring interviews with journalists who had tried to expose these practices previously and been silenced at the White House. The press office was in disarray following Leavitt's sudden departure. The afternoon briefing was cancelled as officials scrambled to craft a response that neither endorsed nor condemned the revelations. President Trump, known for his criticism of fake news, maintained an uncharacteristic silence as his advisors debated whether to distance the administration from Leavitt's actions or embrace the exposures of vindication. By evening, several prominent journalists had broken ranks with their organizations, confirming specific instances documented in the release. A Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter from the New York Times posted, "I can confirm the killed story referenced in file. NYT, the 11th of June 2023 was my investigation. Everything in the leaked emails about why it was suppressed is accurate. I've carried this shame for 2 years. I apologize to the public for my silence until now." These individual confessions transformed the story from a document dump that could be dismissed as selective or misleading into a human drama of institutional corruption and personal redemption. Each journalist who came forward added credibility to the broader narrative and made it harder for media organizations to dismiss the evidence. Meanwhile, Leavitt and Musk had retreated to a secure location to monitor the unfolding situation and prepare for the inevitable backlash. Their team tracked reaction across platforms, identifying which revelations were gaining traction and which needed additional context or promotion. "The response is even stronger than we projected," noted one of Musk's analysts, displaying metrics showing unprecedented engagement with the material. "People aren't just reading the documents, they're actively comparing them to coverage they've consumed over the years and recognizing the patterns for themselves." Leavitt nodded, studying the real-time data. That was the goal. Not to tell people what to think, but to give them the tools to recognize how their perceptions have been shaped. Musk, uncharacteristically subdued as he absorbed the magnitude of what they had set in motion, turned to Leavitt. "You understand there's no going back to your old life after this. You've made powerful enemies today. I made those enemies the day I started collecting evidence," she replied. "The only difference is now they know it." As night fell on the East Coast, the third and final wave of documents was released. Perhaps the most consequential of all, these files detailed coordination between media executives and government officials across multiple administrations, revealing how stories were planted, shaped, or killed based on political relationships rather than journalistic merit. The documentation was meticulous and damning. Calendar entries showing private meetings between network presidents and agency officials, emails requesting specific coverage or the suppression of unflattering stories, recorded phone calls where the language of journalism was cynically manipulated to serve political ends while maintaining the facade of independence. No administration, Republican or Democrat, emerged unscathed. The revolving door between government communications roles and media positions was exposed not as a natural career progression but as a deliberate system to maintain message control across institutional boundaries. In newsrooms across America, the reckoning had begun. Journalists confronted executives with evidence of their complicity. Staff meetings devolved into heated accusations as reporters discovered how their work had been manipulated. At several organizations, journalists staged impromptu walkouts, refusing to participate in coverage that continued to obscure rather than address the scandal engulfing their industry. Public trust, already fragile, collapsed entirely. Viewership of traditional news programs plummeted to historic lows as audiences sought information from independent sources and direct document access. The hashtag media lies became the top trending topic globally, with millions sharing specific examples of deception they had identified in past coverage. Corporate advertisers sensitive to association with scandal, began quietly suspending campaigns on major networks pending evaluation of the situation. The financial impact was immediate and severe, threatening organizations already weakened by changing consumption patterns and the migration to digital platforms. As midnight approached, Leavitt received an unexpected message on her secure device from the journalist who had been her primary source at the Washington Post. "I went public this evening, named myself as your source, provided additional documentation to verify the files. They fired me immediately, but 36 colleagues walked out in protest. This is happening across the industry. The dam has broken." Leavitt showed the message to Musk, who nodded thoughtfully. This is how paradigms shift, not gradually, but all at once. When a critical mass recognizes the old system is unsustainable, what happens tomorrow? Leavitt asked, suddenly aware of the weight of uncertainty before them. "Tomorrow," Musk replied, "we discover whether we've saved journalism or destroyed it. Perhaps both are necessary for something new to emerge." As they prepared for the second day of what was already being called the Great Media Collapse, neither fully grasped how profoundly they had altered not just an industry, but the very foundation of how Americans would receive and process information for generations to come. The revolution wasn't just being televised, it was consuming television itself, along with every other traditional medium that had shaped public perception for decades. And it had only just begun. Dawn broke on day 2 of what social media had dubbed #MediaVeritas, revealing an information landscape transformed overnight. Americans awoke to find their trusted news sources in various states of crisis, some attempting to maintain a facade of normalcy, others acknowledging the scandal with carefully worded statements, and a few embracing radical transparency in a desperate bid to salvage credibility. CNN, perhaps the hardest hit by the revelations, had experienced a senior staff exodus after internal documents revealed systematic manipulation of interview footage beyond standard editing. Their morning program aired with a skeleton crew, the anchor visibly uncomfortable as he read a corporate statement promising a full investigation of these serious allegations. Fox News faced its own reckoning as documents exposed how the network's populist messaging contrasted with internal communications mocking their core audience. Several primetime hosts failed to appear for their broadcasts, their absence explained with vague references to scheduled time off. Print media fared no better. The New York Times and Washington Post websites featured oddly sanitized homepages that conspicuously avoided mentioning the industry's collapse, while their social media engagement plummeted as readers called out the obvious attempt to downplay a story of historic significance. In this vacuum, alternative information channels flourished. Independent journalists who had been marginalized by traditional gatekeepers found their audiences multiplying exponentially. The document repository website created by Musk and Leavitt recorded over 40 million unique visitors in its first 24 hours, with users spending an average of 83 minutes examining primary source materials at the secure facility where Leavitt and Musk continued to monitor developments. The mood was focused but somber. They had anticipated institutional resistance, but the human impact of their actions was becoming increasingly apparent. Journalists losing careers, media organizations facing existential threats, and a public grappling with the realization that their understanding of current events had been systematically manipulated for decades. "We're receiving reports of advertising withdrawals across all major networks," reported one of Musk's analysts. "Preliminary estimates suggest a 70% reduction in ad revenue if current patterns hold." "And subscription cancellations?" Musk asked. "Accelerating. The Times and Post are experiencing churn rates of approximately 22% and climbing. Cable news networks are seeing similar patterns with their streaming services." Leavitt studied the data with mixed emotions. This was never about destroying media institutions. It was about forcing accountability. "Creative destruction," Musk countered. "The corrupt aspects need to collapse before something better can emerge." Their discussion was interrupted by breaking news alerts. The Attorney General had announced a formal investigation into potential violations of securities laws by publicly traded media companies that had misrepresented their editorial practices to shareholders. Simultaneously, the FCC indicated it would review broadcast licenses in light of evidence that networks had violated public interest obligations. The legal implications were expanding beyond their initial expectations. Class action lawsuits were being filed on behalf of shareholders who claimed they were misled about business practices. Advertisers were invoking fraud clauses in their contracts, the carefully constructed legal shields that had protected media organizations were cracking under the weight of documented deception. By midday, a new phase of the crisis emerged, the political fallout. Congressional leaders from both parties called for hearings, each attempting to frame the scandal in terms beneficial to their respective sides. President Trump, breaking his initial silence, posted a characteristically direct statement. "Karoline Leavitt exposed what I've been saying for years. Fake news is real. Didn't know she was investigating while working for me. Very brave. Media corruption hurts Americans." Democratic leadership responded with calls for a nonpartisan commission on media integrity. attempting to position themselves as reformers while distancing from exposed coordination between liberal outlets and previous Democratic administrations. For the American public, the partisan framing felt increasingly irrelevant as they sifted through primary documents themselves, discovering that the manipulation transcended political boundaries. Conservative and liberal outlets alike had participated in a system that prioritized influence and profit over journalistic integrity. The traditional left-right paradigm that had defined media consumption was dissolving in the face of more fundamental questions about truth and accountability. As evening approached, Leavitt received a notification that a coalition of journalists had requested a meeting. These weren't executives or anchors, but reporters and producers, the working professionals whose careers had been built within the compromise system. "I think we should hear them out," she told Musk. "They're not the architects of the corruption, but they've been operating within it. Their perspective matters." The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a conference room in a Washington hotel under heavy security. 20 journalists representing various organizations arrived, their expressions reflecting a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something resembling relief. "We're not here to attack you," began a veteran investigative reporter from CBS. "Many of us have suspected or directly experienced the issues your documents exposed. What we want to understand is, what happens now? You've burned down the house we've been living in. Problematic as it was, where do we go from here?" Leavitt and Musk exchanged glances, recognizing the legitimacy of the question. Their operation had focused on exposure. They had given less thought to reconstruction. "The old model was fundamentally broken," Musk responded. "Not just biased, but structurally corrupt. Advertiser dependency created perverse incentives. Corporate consolidation eliminated diversity of perspective. Rating pressures rewarded sensation over substance." "We understand the diagnosis," interjected a newspaper reporter. "What's the prescription?" Thousands of journalists who entered this profession with genuine idealism are now facing unemployment as organizations collapse. Was destruction the only option? Leavitt leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "The destruction wasn't our goal. Transparency was. But transparency is meaningless without accountability, and accountability sometimes requires painful consequences." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "What happens next depends partly on you, the working journalists who still believe in the core mission of your profession. The institutions may be compromised, but the function remains essential. Democracy requires informed citizens, which means it requires honest journalism." "With what funding model?" asked a digital reporter. "The economic reality is that quality journalism has always required financial support, and you've just obliterated the traditional revenue streams." Musk, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "That's where I come in. I'm announcing tomorrow the creation of a Journalism Integrity Fund, a $5 billion endowment to support independent reporting with a transparent operational model, not owned by me or any corporation, but structured as a public trust, with clear ethical guidelines and complete financial transparency." The room fell silent as the journalists processed this unexpected development. "We're not destroying journalism," Musk continued. "We're liberating it from systems that corrupted its essential function. The fund will prioritize investigations, local reporting, and specialized journalism that serves public interest rather than corporate or political agendas." "Why should we trust you?" challenged a veteran reporter. "You're not exactly neutral yourself. You shouldn't trust me or any single source implicitly," Musk replied. "That's the point. The fund will operate with radical transparency or financing public. All editorial decisions documented, all corrections prominently featured. Trust should be earned through verifiable processes, not institutional authority." As the meeting continued into the night, the conversation evolved from recrimination to reconstruction. These journalists, despite their justified anger at how the exposure had unfolded, shared a fundamental commitment to their profession's core purpose. The discussion gradually shifted to practical questions of how to build new models that would preserve journalistic functions while eliminating the structural corruption that had undermined them by the meeting's end. A framework had emerged. Not a single solution, but an ecosystem approach that recognized different models might serve different aspects of information needs. Some journalists would join new organizations built with transparent funding and governance. Others would operate as independent providers, supported by the fund and direct audience relationships. Still others would focus on training a new generation in both traditional skills and the ethical frameworks needed to navigate modern information challenges. As the journalists departed, many still shell-shocked but now carrying at least the outline of a path forward, Leavitt and Musk found themselves alone in the conference room. $5 billion, Leavitt asked, raising an eyebrow. "That wasn't in our original plan." Musk shrugged. "The moment demanded it. Destruction without creation is just vandalism, no matter how justified. And the governance structure you described, independent trustees, public accountability, operational transparency, you developed that overnight." "I've been thinking about this problem for longer than you might imagine," Musk replied. "The specific implementation, yes, That was improvised, but the principles have been forming since I first recognized how fundamentally broken the information ecosystem had become. Leavitt nodded, understanding that beneath Musk's impulsive public persona lay a more thoughtful strategic mind than most recognized. What about you? Musk asked. Your political career is effectively over. The White House has already distanced themselves despite the president's supportive tweet. Where do you go from here? Leavitt smiled faintly. I didn't go into politics for a career. I went in to serve. There are many ways to serve the public interest beyond government positions. The third day of the media transformation brought the first signs of a new landscape taking shape. Several prominent journalists announced the formation of independent newsrooms operating under transparent models. Technology platforms introduced new frameworks for distinguishing between opinion and factual reporting. Media literacy initiatives gained unprecedented attention as citizens sought tools to navigate an information environment they now recognized as more complex than they had been led to believe. 1 week after the initial release, Leavitt and Musk made their first joint public appearance on a livestream watched by over 40 million Americans. They provided additional context for specific revelations, answered questions about their methodology, and outlined the governance structure for the Journalism Integrity Fund, which would begin accepting applications the following month. We're not asking people to trust us as new authorities, Leavitt emphasized. We're asking them to verify information themselves, to seek multiple sources, to understand the funding and incentives behind different outlets, and to recognize that no single voice has a monopoly on truth. Musk nodded in agreement. The future of information isn't about finding the perfect unbiased source. Such a thing doesn't exist. It's about transparency of perspective, clarity about evidence, and systems that reward accuracy over engagement. As the conversation concluded, a final question addressed the personal cost of their actions. Do you regret initiating this disruption, knowing how many careers have been affected and institutions damaged? Leavitt considered this carefully before responding. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the corruption ran so deep that exposure created such widespread impact. But I don't regret believing that Americans deserve better than a media landscape built on manipulation and deception. Musk added his perspective. Systems that cannot survive transparency deserve to collapse. What emerges now will be messy and imperfect, but it has the potential to be fundamentally healthier than what it replaces. In the months that followed, the American information ecosystem underwent a profound transformation. Traditional media organizations either reformed radically or dissolved entirely. New structures emerged, many explicitly designed around transparency and accountability rather than the illusion of perfect objectivity. The Journalism Integrity Fund supported hundreds of local newsrooms, specialized investigative units, and innovative information projects. Its transparent governance and funding became a model studied in journalism schools worldwide. Leavitt declined numerous offers for political positions, choosing instead to focus on media literacy education. Her curriculum on identifying manipulation techniques and evaluating source credibility became standard in high schools across America. Musk, having disrupted yet another industry, maintained an active interest in the transformation while turning his attention to new technological frontiers. The media project, though not financially profitable in conventional terms, consistently ranked among his proudest achievements. 1 year after #media, VERITAS, a Pew Research study revealed a paradoxical outcome. Americans reported lower trust in media as an institution, but higher confidence in their personal ability to identify reliable information. The blind faith in authoritative sources had been replaced by a more mature, if more demanding, relationship with information. When asked in a follow-up interview whether the disruption had been worth the cost, Leavitt reflected, democracy requires informed citizens making decisions based on shared reality. For too long, we operated under the illusion of information while actually receiving carefully crafted narratives designed to shape rather than inform our thinking. She continued, the transition has been painful, as fundamental changes often are. But when I see local newsrooms thriving again, when I see citizens engaging directly with primary sources, when I see journalists freed from corporate and political constraints, yes, I believe it was worth the cost. Musk characteristically put it more directly. Sometimes you need to break things that are fundamentally broken. The old media system wasn't failing, it had failed. What's emerging now isn't perfect, but it's honest about its imperfections. That's the beginning of something better. The story of how Karoline Leavitt and Elon Musk's unlikely alliance transformed American media reflects the deeper tensions in today's information ecosystem. In an era where trust in institutions has eroded while the need for reliable information has never been greater, their fictional exposé captures a very real yearning for transparency and accountability. From the sources that shape our understanding of the world, the collaboration between a political insider and a tech visionary symbolizes how meaningful change often requires bridges across traditional divides, bringing together different forms of expertise, influence, and perspective to challenge entrenched systems that resist reform from within. for Americans navigating the complex media landscape of 2025. This story carries an important reminder. Information is never neutral. Every source operates with incentives and constraints, and the responsibility for discerning truth ultimately rests with each citizen. The most dangerous corruption isn't bias that announces itself clearly, but manipulation that masquerades as objective authority. As we move forward in this digital age, perhaps the most valuable currency isn't unquestioning trust in any single source, but the critical thinking skills to evaluate evidence, recognize patterns, and construct informed perspectives from multiple vantage points, the very skills that Leavitt and Musk sought to empower through their revelations. Thank you for watching this story about courage, transparency, and the ongoing evolution of our information ecosystem. Don't forget to subscribe and comment below with your thoughts. We'll see you in the next video.